I thought I'd tell the boys and girls a story this morning. A story that is very near and very real to my heart and my life. I've asked you before, how many of you boys and girls have a pet dog? And some of you that are older boys and girls, you know. I want to tell you a story this morning that centers around a dog that I had many, many years ago. You know, I'm turning gray. I'm getting old. Back on the farm in southern Missouri in the early 1940s, we had a dog that we called Pete. He was just a cur dog, you know, a Heinz 57 variety. He stood about so tall, but Pete was a good snake dog. And I thought of this again as Sister Hanson this morning told about the snake episode they had at their house this week. I want to tell you a story that revolves around Pete and also a rattlesnake. It was just about this time of year, and this was back before we had a combine on our farm, and we still cut the oats and the wheat and things with the binder, made them in bundles and shocked them, and then pulled the old thrashing machine out and thrashed it later on in the year. I see many of you nodding. I still remember those days. The old Case thrashing machine was hauled to the junkyard when I was a good big boy, and I had the privilege of pulling it down there and selling it for junk. We wish now we'd kept it. I think we got the whole sum of $38 for it. But anyway, Dad and Uncle John were working out with the binder, binding wheat. Uncle John was pulling the binder and Father was following along. It kicked the bundles off, and Dad would gather several of them together, put them together in the shock and cap it over it with one. And Pete followed Dad round and around the field. Every time they'd get to the end, on one end was the little lake there on Carpenter Bend Farm. He'd run down into the bushes and prowl around. At the other end was Black River, and he'd run down along the slough where the slough went out into the river, and he would hunt. Dad would often rest a few moments in the shade and then start back across the field shocking. One time when they were at the end next to the river, Pete treed something. And being a dog that was always hunting and killing snakes, Father anticipated that he had treed a snake. So Dad went out to see what had happened. And there coiled in that brush near the slough was a large rattlesnake. And he had coiled, and he had his head sticking up, and his tail was going out here, and it rattled. He had 13 rattlers and a button. He was 6 foot 6 inches long, and he was 7 inches in diameter. Father looked at that snake, and he recognized the size of old Pete, and he knew that if Pete tackled that snake, that he could never shake it and break its neck and kill it. And so he called him back, and he got him away from the snake. Father went over to an old treetop that had been cut there, and he broke off a limb in order to kill the snake. And at the crack of that limb and the noise and the excitement, Pete decided it was time to attack. And he ran in to grab that snake. But he couldn't shake the snake. He was too big. And that snake bit old Pete right over the left eye. Father killed the snake, drug it out into the field, but Pete immediately became very, very sick, very ill, just within moments, minutes. Father carried him the half a mile across the field to the car. He poured him some water from his jug and tried to get him to drink, but Pete wasn't thirsty. By this time, his head and his eye had begun to swell. So Father put him into the car, and he brought him to the house, and they did all kinds of home remedies trying to save his life. But within less than an hour, our dog Pete was dead. Now, you know, it was a sad occasion. I remember watching him die just inch by inch. And of course, I cried. It was sad. We took Pete out behind the barn, down over the hill, and we dug a grave and we buried him. We got a flat rock and we set it up for a monument. But you know, that story has taught me many, many lessons. Rattlesnakes are very poisonous. They're very deadly. But you know, boys and girls, rattlesnakes are not the only thing in this whole world that are poisonous and are deadly. And even though that's a sad story, I'll tell you, if it can drive home to your heart and your life a lesson that will help you avoid the poisonous and deadly issues that we find in life. It's worth my repeating. You know, the Bible says that Satan is like a roaring lion. I think we could also say that he's like a rattlesnake. It says that he's like a lion seeking whom he may devour. He's like a snake seeking whom he can strike and attacks. The attacks and strikes of Satan are deadly when it comes in relationship to your soul's salvation and mine. So let's remember to avoid Satan. Let's remember to avoid his attacks and his way of life like we would a rattlesnake. If Pete had avoided the rattlesnake, he would not have died. And if you and I avoid the attacks of Satan, we someday will live with Christ forever and avoid the second death.